Thanks for joining us on Virtual Day Trip to Wine Country, presented by Citi. I'm Sam Kimball from New York Wine Events, and we are looking forward to our session this evening. We're going to a new destination. We're actually going to Contra Costa County in California, which is awesome. One of the largest counties in the Greater Bay Area. Sandy soil from ancient sand dunes, very windy, and an extraordinary and rather unique place for growing grapes and making wine. Vineyards that are in the south end of the historical delta of the Sacramento River. Some of the richest soil in the world. We're going to learn some things tonight that I'm really excited about. Stuff that I didn't know until the last couple of days. For example, in the 1880s, 120, 140 years ago, the best grapes in California were grown in the Contra Costa County, not Napa, not Sonoma, in Contra Costa County. This area is famous for agriculture. And I want to show everybody briefly here a map of where this is in case you don't know it. I certainly was not as familiar with it as a native Californian might be. But if you look at this map and you see the map pin behind me, the red map pin, we're sort of southwest a little bit of, well, in Clarksburg, which is where the winery is, southwest of Sacramento. And then if you go down further, you can see where the bay comes in, and you actually get into an area called Sassoon Bay, and the vineyards are right there at the tip of that, sticking inland about probably 70 miles from San Francisco. Very cool part of the world, and we're heading to a winery called Three Wine Company, which is a family winery focused on sustainable growing, coupled with a hands-on wine experience. The winemaker and founder, Matt Cline, has a philosophy that is about the dirt, about the microclimate, and sustainable wine growing approach from the vineyard all the way to the bottle, and really focused on great wine making. That philosophy, by the way, if you have ordered the wines ahead of this tasting, or if you're planning on maybe ordering a bottle or more during the tasting or after, that philosophy is in every bottle that Three Wine produces. And the other thing that's really cool and unique about this winery is they work a lot with ancient vines. And I love, in talking to Matt about what they do, their calling card is all about the dirt, the microclimate, but this is the part I love. Their motto is, "Don't screw it up." So Mother Nature's got a good thing going on. Don't screw it up. So to learn all about Three Wine Company on the web and at your own leisure, check out threewinecompany.com. I'm going to put up in the background here the URL, and also, we have a deal alert, and that is that you can get $10 shipping on 4 bottles or more from Three Wine Company. That's part of our New York Wine Events offer, and they've generously made that available to us. If you use, and you can see the code here on my screen, the promo code TWC10. So $10 shipping on 4 bottles or more. And you'll see when we talk about the rosé, there is the deal of the century on the rosé tonight, guys. So check it out. This is an awesome opportunity to pick up some great wine at a great deal. Welcome everybody. Please hit the Q&A tab in Zoom and let us know if you have a question along the way. We will answer questions on the fly as we go. I'm going to put up a background here of these beautiful vineyards behind me. We're going to talk a little bit more about them. And also hit the chat. For those of you who join us occasionally and have done so more than once, or this is not your first time, you know to hit the chat and let us know where in the world you are tuning in from. We love to hear from people all over the country. So it's my pleasure tonight, to host Matt Cline, the founder and the winemaker at 3 Wine Company. Welcome, Matt. It's so cool having you on the show.
Yes, great. Thanks, Sam, for inviting me to present to your clientele, your group, and it's just great to be here. I love talking about our situation, our old vines, and where we are, and I've been doing it for, I think this past harvest we finished about a week ago was my 36th harvest.
Wow.
And using these old vines at the edge of the Contra Costa County.
So you started when you were like 12.
Pretty much. I was actually about, I was still going to school at UC Berkeley, and my brother and I started a little winery way back then, and it grew really large. And my wife and I, in 2007, left that family business and started our little family business, and our focus is these old vines and what put our previous family winery on the map. Really cool stuff.
So a quick first question, and I want to jump into some stuff that you and I talked about earlier that's fascinating. But the quick first question is an easy one. Why is it called 3 Wine Company?
Okay, well, 3 is a magical number. It keeps coming back in my life. But basically, the primary reason we call ourselves 3 is that there's 3 elements that you need to have to make great wine. And, obviously site, or the dirt, is one of them. The dirt is, regulates the vine growth. And that's really important. Too much vigor and wine quality goes down. Too less vigor, wine production goes down. But somewhere in the middle is where you make really good wine. And of course, tied with that is the microclimate. And we have a really unique microclimate in Contra Costa County, or in our vineyards around the town of Oakley. It's very windy, and so the vines really just mature the crop very slowly. Of course, as winemakers and viticulturists, grape growers, we have a impact. And so those 3 elements, the dirt, the microclimate, and don't screw it up, is our motto. And that's why we're 3 Wine Company.
I love that. Well, I thought it was going to be a much more, I'm not as thoughtful and I'm probably more superficial in my thinking than you are. There's going to be a much more sort of blasé, sort of frivolous reason, but I love the fact that it's tied to those 3 key elements to making the wine. Welcome to a bunch of people. By the way, Matt, we have people tuning in from Long Island, Santa Clarita, Southern California, North Carolina, the Bronx, Raleigh, North Carolina, Maryland. And one of our viewers asked an interesting question, and we like to answer these questions on the fly. Was the winery Cline Cellars, the family winery?
Of course, yes. I was a founding winemaker there. I made the wines for the first 16 years. So I helped grow that company from, my first vintage was 300 cases. And when I left, I was making over 250,000 cases.
Wow.
So it was a great experience working with my brother, and growing a company that large. But, you know, like anything else, I long for the early days.
Yeah.
So my wife and I started a new company, and it's totally family run, and we're small, but we're just having a lot of fun. We complain a lot, but it's a lot of fun.
That is awesome.
Too much.
By the way, I want to give a little shout out to Patty and Son, your buddies from Sacramento. They're enjoying a bottle of your 2013 established 1885 and enjoying the event. They said "Go Bears." I think that's a birthday reference.
Well, they named Patty named her dog after our company. San is 3 in Chinese.
All right, there you go. Excellent.
Hi, Patty.
So let's get into the interesting stuff, because I try to learn as much about wine making regions and history as I can. And you kind of blew my mind when we talked about doing this broadcast, when you told me about some of the history of California winemaking, especially like the thing I referenced earlier about the fact that the best grapes in the 1880s were grown in Contra Costa County. I mean, Napa was buying grapes from Contra Costa. So you have some of the oldest vines in the state. I mean, we're talking 100 and something years old, and some that are, you know, well into 100, 140 or beyond. What's the history of that, and what is the sort of history in the arc of grape growing and winemaking in California? And specifically, when you talk about the history, what role did Prohibition in the 1930s play in?
Okay, that I could speak for hours on all this stuff, but I'll try to be concise. If you ask my wife, I have a hard time doing that. But at any rate,
I get the same comment.
So really, our kind of our start, if you discount the missionaries who planted grapes in California in the 1700s, and start with the early 1860s, when guys like Augusta Hairsty, who was commissioned by the state of California to go over to Western Europe and bring back cultivars, European cultivars, to start advancing our agriculture in California. The state of California obviously knew that agriculture was going to be the real gold rush. So he and many others in the early 1860s went to Europe, brought back cuttings, and in Augusta's case, he was stiffed when he got back. The state of California stiffed him. And so he went to Sonoma County, planted some foundation blocks. And it was budwood that originally was spread around the state. And so, certainly Sonoma County is really kind of the county where a lot of these early vineyards were planted. And but Contra Costa, if you think about the history of California, it wasn't until the railroad was connected that our population shot up. And the railroad then tracks were laid across the state, and vineyards were planted everywhere. But when you think about the varietals that we are using today, they are our vineyards are kind of the last roadmap of what we are doing prior to Prohibition. Prohibition started in January 5th, 1920. That's when commercial winemaking ceased for 13 years. So it also coincides with our very first grape crop report. So that grape crop report was a mandate. All growers had to report to the state of California what they were planting and what was in the ground. And if you look at that report, so you'll see a snapshot of what was important. And it ended up being about a third Zin, a third Carignan, and a third Mataro. So about 90% of the grapes were those three varieties.
All right, so hold that thought. So 90% of the grapes were Carignan, Mataro, and Zinfandel.
Correct.
Which are not among, as I like to say, we Americans are boring and we drink Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot Noir, maybe, one other grape. Not even among the usual suspects. And you're saying pretty much 100% of the grapes grown back then were of those three types in the region.
Correct. Well, you got to understand that at the time, we didn't have the water system we have now, so irrigation wasn't there, so everything was dry farmed. And so you have to have a certain amount of vigor to grow in those conditions. But our vineyards were planted by Europeans, mostly Italian and Portuguese. And so they brought over their blending traditions. And really, varietal wines only came about because of Prohibition. Mm-hmm. Prohibition wiped out all the winemakers of the time. And so there was also another factor that kind of really messed up the state is the compromise to the Volstead Act, which was the 200 gallon per family rule. And that caused actually a huge grape acreage expansion, because if you were alive during Prohibition and you were of European descent or wine was part of your culture, you were not going to have a meal without it. And so most people's only choice was to make their own wine. And so as you could imagine, grape acreage really exploded. But the problem is there was no winemakers to help regulate what was planted where. Mm-hmm. And so unfortunately, the wrong grapes were planted in the wrong dirt, and California, their first national reputation wasn't very good. And
so basically things were on a good glide path before 1920. Great grape growing, great quality, European people of European descent making wines, and then it all just got short-circuited. And when they replanted, they planted grapes that weren't planted in the right soil in the right place, and the grapes weren't that great, the wines weren't that great, and everything went down. And wasn't until the mid 70s that things
late 60s, early 70s.
Things came back with the late 60s, early 70s, and then the Paris competition of 1976, and suddenly you have award-winning wines coming out of California. But what you're saying is it knocked 50 years or so, 40 or 50 years out of the history, but also changed the course of the history.
Right. So as you could imagine, Carignan and Mataro, they're very vigorous varieties. They wouldn't do very well in Napa Valley. And the varietals we're growing there now, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, are very appropriate. But not so for most of the state. They get, those varietals get certainly very narrow areas of cool temperatures, and but the issue is, over 50 years we didn't have winemakers running around the U.S. talking about where we grow the grapes and what dirt we're growing them in.
Right.
And so, to educate, was just, we went to varietal labeling. It was very easy to
say Chardonnay or say Cabernet Sauvignon.
Teach people how to say Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon.
Right. So I want to ask the group, people watching. So I see Leona just said she's enjoying a 2010 Mataro tonight. That's awesome.
Oh, cool.
Good on you, Leona. I am a huge proponent of trying not the usual suspect grapes, not just Merlot, Cabernet, and Chardonnay, etc. who else who's watching, if you can hit us in the chat, has had a Mataro, which is a type of wine growing grape, and a wine can be made of just Mataro or dominant Mataro grape, or a Carignan. Is anybody besides Leona, who's drinking Mataro right now, familiar with drinking those wines made from those grapes specifically? Because I have a feeling it's probably, you know, Reed says both. There's a few people saying both, but I'm guessing that Reed and Amy and Tamara are all based in California, and they know 3 Wine Company. Versus East Coasters, I doubt have had these wines.
Well, I'd like to broaden this sphere. I mean, Mataro is the California synonym of this well-known international grape. The French call it Mourvedre. The Spaniards call it Monastrell. We call it Mataro because, you know, again, a lot of these cuttings that came into California were shipped out of the port of Mataro, which is in the county or Barcelona. You know, there's a port city called Mataro, and you know, so why did that become the synonym? Well, you know, historically over the centuries, you know, certainly the Italians and the Portuguese don't like the French or the Spaniards, so they're not going to give them any credit. So that's my take on why we use Mataro, is that you have Italians and Portuguese who planted most of our vineyards, and it was literally on the export papers, all these vines coming in. And that's why we have Mataro as its synonym.
I want to submit to everyone watching that, you know, I see it every week, almost every day on our wine tours when we're in wine country in New York State and in other contexts. Some will say, oh my God, I just had a glass or a taste of Petit Verdot. I had no idea. I loved it. I'd never heard of this grape. I'd never heard of this wine. And it was extraordinary. So to me, that's why we do this. That's why we have these conversations, Matt, like, you know, to help people discover that there are vistas in the wine world that they may not even know about. And when they discover them, it's a wonderful thing.
Well, and who hasn't traveled to Europe and gone out and had meals and wine from any of the Western European countries and really enjoyed it? I mean, yeah, I might not, you know, they're mostly blends, so it's hard to know what's actually in there.
Right. But then who hasn't been to, you know, a lot of people go to Europe and they find themselves in a region or an area that's not, you know, necessarily Burgundy or Provence or Bordeaux. Like I found myself circumstantially, not for a wine-based trip, in Aragon, in Spain. Aragon is a province north of Valencia, and it's a great wine growing region, and they make spectacular wines. I've never seen a bottle of Aragon wine on the shelf in the United States.
Well, when you're traveling like that, you are relying on the locals who have been making wine in that region for centuries. And so what varietally is in that glass is not important. It's you trust that that area, those group of winemakers who have been at it for so long.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, I don't live in the past. You know, I always sometimes think where we would be if we didn't have Prohibition.
Yeah, so for everybody watching, that's what I wanted Matt to talk about, was like the extraordinary diversion in the path of the history of California wine that occurred because of Prohibition. And I had no idea about that until we talked about it today. it was an eye opener. I want to show everybody really quickly, because we talked about ancient vines, and I think that it's important I want to go back to this photo here, and then maybe we could take a look at the satellite picture, Matt, and then let's get tasting wine. So this picture behind me, I think is at least in my view, is an incredible illustration of the ancient, I call it the trunk. I don't know if I'm using the right word, but the bottom of the vines is just gnarly, and it's really, really old.
The vine behind you is actually a Tokay vine, and it's a fairly large vine for us. I mean, we don't have a field of this. It's a rogue vine. It's just a one vine in the middle of a bunch of Zinfandel. But I
mean, look at the size. Look at the compared to the bottle width. Look at the width of those. The bottom of those vines is huge.
Yes, it's pretty cool. It is kind of the vine that we use to represent our label. If you look around here, there's the heartwood is rotted away. Our vines are so old that an old pruning wound can end up being a hole through the vine over decades because of just oxidation.
That's wild.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, this picture is worth 1,000 words, and it's extraordinary in its illustration of what those vines are like. Should we take a look at the satellite, and can you talk a little bit about what goes on with the the area in terms of
Sure.
the growing and the soil? So let me pull that up. Bear with me 1 second. We'll share it. So this is a satellite image.
Okay. Our vineyards are right about here. What this body of water here is the Sassoon Bay. And
so basically right above where it says Concord on this satellite map.
And slightly to the right.
Bay, right?
Yes. Oh, yes. This is the Sassoon Bay. And of course, San Francisco here. This is the North Bay. We've got Sonoma County here, Napa here, and of course, San Francisco. And this whole large valley right here, this is the Central Valley. It's an 800-mile long valley that gets really hot. And it has some of the best soils in the world. And it's our breadbasket, and for not only the U.S., but we obviously ship a lot of agricultural products all over the world. And a lot of it is coming from California, and this is where it's grown. So the importance of that is that when the valley heats up, it creates a vacuum. Some airflow has to go and underneath that hot air and take up that space. And it all comes through the San Francisco Bay. And that's why San Francisco is a miserable place to be in August, because it's just shrouded in fog all day long. It doesn't really burn off. And, the airflow pulls that fog in from the Pacific Ocean, pushes it up to Napa and Sonoma. And it takes a right here at the Carquinez Strait, and this is the only gap in the Coast Range that the coldest air can flow through. And it basically shoots into the Central Valley, and it is why Lodi is the best place to grow grapes in the Central Valley, because it gets cool nights, but it is also what formed our soil type.
Yeah.
Because of this gap and its narrowness, the wind is so fierce that it is built sand dunes around the head of the Sassoon Bay.
That's amazing. And
All
so
the time.
basically that cold air comes through the bay and goes right kind of over where above the where the word Concord is here on the satellite map,
Correct.
and then shoots into that cut into the Central Valley towards Stockton.
Correct. And a lot of it will go up the Sacramento River. You know, cold air is going to travel the lowest elevation. And
Yeah.
the river would represent that. And that's why where our winery is in the very northern end of the Delta area, this large area here, this was the floodplains when the Sacramento River wasn't levied, you know, over 100 years ago. Well, it would have been, yeah, I mean, about 100 years ago, we started putting levees up, and at any rate, the air goes up that river and cools off area best.
Well, I wanted to give everybody a sense of where we're at. The other thing I want to show, Matt, is how the soil, despite what you were just saying about how fertile it is in the valley, if you look behind me here, how sandy it is.
Okay, so what we're dealing with is the sandiest loam classification, and it's called Delhi sandy loam. And it's basically beach sand.
Mm-hmm.
And this vineyard right here there's about 35 feet of sand piled up in that location.
Mm-hmm.
And the uniqueness of this is off the charts, because these vines were obviously planted before phylloxera was an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, these vines are growing on their own roots. And how I like to describe that is what's on top is the same thing that's on bottom. As many of you know, at the turn of the 19th century, phylloxera wiped out all the grapevines in Europe. You know, we had been transporting our dirt back and forth, and this little louse called phylloxera started to grow in the vineyards in Europe. And because they did not evolve with phylloxera like our North American varieties, vines started to decline in Europe, and there was nothing they could figure out to solve the issue. There's a little louse that chews on the roots and sucks the life out of them, and they start to not be productive at all. And but you know, with that, you know, it was North American roots that saved the industry in Europe. But it's pretty cool to be able to grow vinifera alone, because it's not a perfect union. The North American root grafted with
European stock, basically.
Right, and so it's not perfect. Yeah, there's a lot of problems with viruses and new stuff cropping up all the time.
Right.
But obviously, we can maintain an industry with it.
Well, I wanted to share this and everybody see that sandy nature of the soil. One question, and let's get started tasting wines. Question from Getty: how big is the vineyard?
Well, this particular block is 16 acres.
Mm-hmm.
These vineyards were all planted by families, and so you know they're on the California scale. These are very small vineyards. They were all hand tended, as we still do today. Obviously, head trained, you can't get equipment in to do the job. You have to have humans do it. And you want most of all my growers and the guy that does our farming on our vineyards uses all the same guys. And so the labor force is consistent, and because you have to learn these vines, and they constantly, every vine is not the same, and so you need talented people to farm them.
To farm them. One other quick question from Nancy says, I noticed there's a span of space between vines. Is it because of the type of vine or to prevent problems that occur in the vine?
No, it's because these vines are dry farmed. If you
slow down one second. What is dry farmed?
We rely on only what Mother Nature provides.
So there's no irrigation.
There's no irrigation,
and that's sprinkler system.
Nope.
Got it.
Nope. And so this vineyard, if you pack them tight, you wouldn't get any growth.
Yeah.
You need some space so they don't compete
for the water.
In more cultured vineyards, you want tight spacing so they do compete, so you can control the vigor. There's too much vigor.
Right.
You irrigate in some vineyards.
But that explains it. That's really interesting. So you don't want the vine that's X number of feet away from the next one to be fighting for the nourishing in the water.
Right, and then when you consider that sand is the poorest soil there is, you have to be careful that you don't get into a devigorating situation.
That is super interesting. Amy, we're going to answer your question in a minute, but that's a tricky question. So we're gonna get to that in a second. I think that's going to get Matt in trouble with the team. All right, so we're going to get started tasting, and one of the things I love about tonight is that we got 4 wines, and 3 of them, really all 4 are great values, but 3 of them are like so approachable and accessible in terms of price point. And again, the thing that just blows me away about wineries like yours, Matt, is that you make extraordinary wine, and then to be able to sell it at a really fair and accessible price is just, it's special. So the first one is, we're going to start with the Chardonnay, the 2018 Paella Chardonnay. I'm assuming it's well configured for having with paella. It's only $24. Tell us a little bit about this wine, and other than paella, are there other things that we should think about pairing it with?
Well, the name, the Paella Party, is because of the label.
Okay.
The label is a painting of our biggest party of the year, and that's after harvest at the end of October. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to have it this year, but it's we do have a friend of mine does the paella cooking, and it's a duck and chorizo is the proteins.
Right.
And it's really rich, and it goes really well with all of our big red wines.
Okay.
But the Clarksburg is a well-known area for Chardonnay, and it's about a 30,000 acre appellation, and Chardonnay is definitely its primary or most well-known grape. And there's always in good Clarksburg Chardonnays, there's a tropical, some pineapple. I mean, it's very lively fruit aromas. And the style is virtually no oak. We start the fermentation in stainless steel, and most of it, at least half to 60% of it, stays in stainless steel. During all my white wine fermentations, I like to move the juice off its gross lees and into a new tank, and then finish it off. At that point in time with the Chardonnay, I'll put some of it in barrels when it's about half sugar. And so there'll be a portion of this wine is fermented in more neutral American oak barrels, And so we get a more luscious texture. We're not trying to get lots of oak in it. We're not trying to do malolactic fermentation. California Chardonnay, in my opinion, is best when it's not adjusted. The acidity is not adjusted that way.
Mm-hmm.
Our grapes aren't really high acid, and we want to preserve that acidity.
Well, I love the label. The painting is really cool. What would you pair this? What would be your ideal meal to have this wine with?
Oh, these are hard questions for a winemaker, but to be truth be told, this is our aperitif wine. This is our cooking wine. This is what we drink when we're cooking.
Okay.
Do you have my wife might have a choice. Do you?
I think that goes really nice with like a pasta primavera.
Pasta primavera.
I love it. I love it. It's got a little bit of oak, but it's clean. And that is awesome. And I love the fact that you call it a cooking wine. You confused me for a moment there.
Not cooking with it, drinking it while you're
drinking it while you're cooking. Tamara says, hi, Erin.
Hi.
All right, so let's move on to the next one. I'm going to put it up in my background. This is the rosé. Kind of cool because I think you said it's 3 different grapes, and it's made in a method of making rosé that is not the traditional Provence. I love this about it. It's got a deeper, darker pink shade. It's in the Tavel AOC style. But tell us about this. It's 3 grapes and a little bit longer with the skins on it when it's fermented.
Well, yeah, Tavel is a appellation right next to Chateauneuf-du-Pape, and the varietals that are used there are certainly Mourvèdre and Syrah and Grenache. And because in California, the mix of grapes was Zin, Carignan, and Mataro, that's what I get to use for this style of wine, but using the same techniques of skin contact. So we pick the grapes for rosé, and they're all old vines. The Zin comes in and goes direct to press, which means the grapes are just dumped into the press and we squeeze the juice out. Both the Carignan and the Mataro get what's called skin contact. And so we destem those grapes and put them in these small portable tanks that can hold, about 3.5 tons of must. And we chill it down overnight. And the next day we open the door into the press open the door of the port tank into the press and press that juice off the skins. And it comes out with this, it's like, pretty dark color.
That's gorgeous, the color.
We know that during the fermentation, color falls out of solution. And so this is what we're left with, a more robust looking wine, a more food friendly wine. You could drink it by the pool like Provence, but it goes with, there's so much berry flavor that it's just wonderful with food.
Yeah, so that was, and I'm glad you answered that, because a lot of people think of rosé, especially dry Provence style rosé. It is great for the beach, great for the picnic, great for just hanging out. But in this case, you got something you can do some nice pairing with. And I just love the color. So by the way, I have to give you guys some props. This is the one where there's a case deal So you heard it here, everybody. First, there's a case deal right now from 3 Wine Company for $120 for a case of this rosé. $120 plus only $10 on the shipping. Matt, I'm calling you after the tasting, and we're going to order some for my house.
Good. I recommend it.
That's a deal of the century, everybody. And
You know, one of the issues is we're so programmed to only drink rosés of the current vintage. And, you know, rosés are made all over the world, in every appellation, in every village. And they are wines that aren't necessarily just to be drunk early. This wine, because of the Carignan and the Mataro, those are grapes that resist oxidation. And they're actually better the next summer than the first.
And so how does it, what's the tasting notes? If somebody's like, I know Provence style dry rosé, you know, it's everywhere. How does this differ in its tasting characteristics and notes from a Provence style rosé?
Well, it just has a lot more complexity. It's a drier wine, and it's because of the varietal mix. You do see some evolution in the glass. I mean, the first pour is good. The next sip is even better. So it's just there's just a lot of flavor, a lot of from, you know, cherries and just pomegranate. There's just wonderful flavors in this wine, and it's just a beautiful wine.
That's awesome. I am calling you after we're done, and we're getting the case here because it's too good. And I love about
There's
this
only
rosé.
a few left, so if you want some, you got to call.
Yeah. So by the way, what's really cool about this one to me is that we started talking about the history of wine in California and grapes and the prohibition. This one is made from those 3 grapes that Matt was talking about were the dominant, amazing grapes for wine in the before 1920, which is Mataro, Carignan, and Zinfandel. So it's like Back to the Future.
Yeah.
So I love that.
I wish.
All right, so let's move on to the next one. I believe we're doing is we're doing the red label Zinfandel. So
Yes.
this is one of those same grapes, and you see this bottle on the screen to my right. And we're going to taste this. We're talking about this Zinfandel, and then in a moment we're going to talk about the other Zinfandel. This one is also incredibly accessible in terms of price point. It's $16 a bottle. Contra Costa County vineyard. What are the tasting notes? What are the characteristics of this wine, Matt?
Well, just to talk a little bit about the wine that goes into this bottle. So this is about 60% of the volume in this bottle is from only 25-year-old vines. Of course, in most folks' books, that is a mature vineyard, and our crop yields on that are below state average by a lot. And the balance of the volume in that bottle is our old vines, our 120 to 135-year-old vines. So our average age is over 75. So it certainly has old vine characteristics. We also, I believe that Zin is a great grape, but 100% Zin, I think Zin needs its partners. And Carignan adds a fleshiness to the palate, some black cherries, a lot of color, because Carignan and Mataro and grapes like Petit Syrah and Alicante Bouschet, they all have thick skins and they have a lot of color in them. Where Zin, we love Zin because it has vivacious fruit, and because of it dehydration, it always has a lot of acidity. And so, but you know, again, this particular bottling is about 77% Zin, and the rest is a little bit of Carignan, a little bit of Mataro, usually about 6 or 8% Petit Syrah, percentages of Alicante Boucher.
So we're having in my house tonight, we're having spaghetti with like meatballs, traditional style. Is this a good pairing?
Perfect pairing. It is a perfect pairing for that. And if you were having a cheeseburger, it would be a perfect pairing for that. And if you would have salmon, it would be a perfect pairing for that.
I love that. Well, the fact of the matter is that people who know me know that I'll go off about California Zinfandel because it can be so extraordinary. And I think this would be a great combination with like a spaghetti and meatballs.
So to me, what Contra Costa Zin exemplifies is more raspberry to blackberry. So to me, that's the pinnacle of Zinfandel flavors, is that more deep red to black fruits.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's one of my true guilty pleasures in life is California Zin. All right, so let's move on to the last wine. I'm assuming this is a little bit more of a reserve wine. This is the 2015 Zinfandel Live Oak, Contra Costa County, and I will put it up on the screen in my background here. Let's see. Sorry, guys, just trying to find it. And this is $36 a bottle, and you know, still a great value. Tell us a little bit about the origins of this one, and what are the distinctions between this, for example, and the red label that we just looked at.
Okay, well, I use 8 or 9 different Zinfandel vineyards that were planted in the 1880s. And this one we actually own. And we call it Live Oak because it's on Live Oak Avenue in the little town of Oakley, which is a town that was established in 1991. But these vineyards were pretty much all over the area. And unfortunately, we're losing some of these vineyards to you know, Bay Area growth. But nonetheless, we call it Live Oak because we can't call it Mazzoni. There's a importer in Chicago that imports a Italian wine by the name Mazzoni. And so they have the primary patent on the name. So in actuality, I have a history of labeling a Zin from a adjoining vineyard by Live Oak. And in my Cline Cellars days, our most highly rated wine was our Live Oak Zin. It would always get a 94 or 95 in the Wine Spectator. And that really helped put Cline Cellars on the map. And this is from basically the same vineyard, but a different part.
Got it. And so what would you have the same types of foods with this as the red label, or would you go in a different direction?
I would go in a different direction. This is a special wine. You know, we're only getting a few tons per acre. I actually produced 3 different single vineyard Zinfandels. One, the Evangelo, the Bigelow, and then the Live Oak. And these these vineyards are, if you line them up side by side, they are very totally different, and they're very site-specific differences. I talked about the depth of the sand dunes, and what's really unique about the area is that all these sand dunes are underlaid by a clay hardpan, and so these vines have to get down towards that hardpan to get water. And of course, it's easy for them. Sand is relatively easy to grow in. So the live oak is at the high end of that sand profile, where the Evangelo is at the low end, and those vines are a little more vigorous. Mm-hmm. And if you taste the wine side by side, they're so remarkably different, even though they're only a couple of New York City blocks apart. Mm-hmm. And so I describe our live oak as it's really elegant. It's got a lot going on, and the wine is very bright, and it goes raspberry to blackberry, but it's very well balanced, but it is a big wine. All of our single vineyard Zins are about 15%, which, in some areas that might not carry very well, but because of our acidities, all of our Zins are in the 3.4 to 3.6 range, and that is low for that ripe of a wine. Mm-hmm. And so, and the acidities are 6 to 7 grams. And that just translates to getting your mouth watering and to make the colors more intense and the flavors brighter. Yep. And makes them perfect food wines. And of course, this wine, my wife says, duck and fig reduction sauce.
Okay, so it's a little more refined. I want to share Jeffrey, in case people didn't see it in the chat. I want to share Jeffrey's comment. Live Oak Zinfandel, tremendous wine, full of flavor and texture. Our American Wine Society chapter rated this wine the highest score of any wine they've tasted over the past 3 years. Wow. So if that doesn't, I just decided I'm adding some of this to my order of rosé.
Yeah.
Because
it's amazing the wines that I've been making from these vineyards. They age so beautifully, and part of that, I think the best variety that I have for aging is Carignan. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've had 20-year-old Carignan that was so youthful, it would just knock your socks off. So, these wines are fun. They're very unique, for sure.
Yeah, they sound amazing, and it, it's not every, but every so often that we get to hang out with somebody that has the kind of knowledge and perspective, Matt, that you have. Getty just said, whatever you're doing, stay the course. So
we will. By
the way, everybody, for convenience sake, I'm putting up on the screen behind me the URL for the winery. If you think these wines are interesting, take advantage of this great offer on the shipping. And what's great is, and certainly us East Coasters, myself included, always forget that when you get outside of Napa and Sonoma, but certainly outside of Napa, like these Contra Costa County winery or vineyards, the values are, the wines are so accessible from a price point standpoint. You just can't ignore that. And we've had some great visits, Matt, with some wineries in Lodi and other parts of the state. And Napa is amazing, but one of the things that people don't realize is there's a lot of extraordinary selections to be had in other counties. And I think that certainly for me, this was eye-opening to learn about your area and these wines in particular.
Yeah, I just think you, all your folks that are listening here have an opportunity. We're at the start of the fourth quarter. Hopefully we have something to celebrate the next 3 months. And you know, it's the season of wine giving, right? And so it's a good opportunity to introduce other people to Contra Costa.
Absolutely, well, Tamara says it hands down. Three Wine is our favorite winery. Everything is just magic. I will say, I want to remind people, because we always try to give a little bit of helpful information. You know what goes great with the turkey at Thanksgiving? Rosé. And so, you know, this is a good time to get some rosé. Everybody thinks rosé for the summer, but actually rosé is a wonderful wine to have at the Thanksgiving table as well.
And especially this one, the berries really go well with turkey and cranberries.
Well, listen, Matt, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time out. And I know you've been running around and also just dodging fires and stuff. So it's really with great appreciation and gratitude from us that you did this.
Thank you, Sam, for setting this up.
We will hopefully see you soon. We'd like to come out and visit when everything calms down. And by the way, Amy said Zinfandel goes great with turkey. Well, Amy, in my book, Zinfandel goes great with anything. And so thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Next week, by the way, I want everybody, if you're up for it, Wednesday afternoon at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, we're going to visit with an incredible Spanish winery. The reason we're doing 1:30 p.m. Eastern is that they're outside of Barcelona, Perez Balta Winery, which makes incredible wines. And we'll be hanging out with the winemaker Marta Casas. So go to our site, NewYorkWineEvents.com, sign up, and hopefully we'll see some of you there. And thank you again for tuning in, Matt. Thanks again, Erin. Thank you, and we'll talk soon.
Take care,
guys. Be well.